kind of going to autopilot, I think.
Yeah.
So I moved the table and he was laid down and he was unconscious. So I was performing CPR and then the emergency service came. Paramedics do what they were going to do. And it was, brother, it's like, there was something about me that wanted to just understand, do everything. Yes, I didn't go there with an English mindset expecting things to be the same way they were in England. However, I didn't know how different they were to England.
Right.
So I had no comparison to make. But everything they did was Jamaican to me, so I enjoyed it.
Did you cope? Could you cope with the slowness of Jamaica at that time?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because I learned a really good trick there about traveling, and that was to leave my head behind and just be where I am. So as soon as I got there, there must have been a level of emotional maturity then, because I just settled into it. I just settled into it. It was one of the best experiences. It was a page turner in my life, because I realised then I stayed in Montego Bay for about 3 weeks. I met another uncle called Rocky, and then other cousins and family, and it was the warmth and the openness in which they received me that just made me feel so amazing. And one particular day, I went down to the market with my grandma, and we were in the market and she was meeting her friends, and they came over and she said, "Look for my eye colour brown grandson." And I was laughing because, you know, they were poking me and stuff, but she was really proud of me, and the fact that she was proud of me was a big sign of acceptance to me, because I don't know what I thought, but yeah, she was obviously demonstrating that she was really proud of me. And then every once in a while I'd be walking past and they go, "Psst, English, psst, redskin," and that's it. And I was just picking up the sense of the space. So I stayed in Montego Bay for 3 weeks, which is more, in my experience of Jamaica, it's more country than Kingston. So then I went to Kingston, and Kingston reminded me a lot of more of America.
Where in Kingston?
So I went to Duaney Park first, Spanish town, and then I stayed up by Trafalgar Road, you know, near the banking sector in the centre.
Is that Uptown Kingston?
Uptown Kingston, yeah. So I had a mix, I had a lot of family there, all from different social status, some working in really high-powered, high-level jobs, and some working in agriculture and stuff, but a whole range, which was fantastic for me because it was all the same thing. So going to Kingston was fun as well because it was different, and it was the patois I recognised was easier to catch on to in Kingston than it was in the country, and I realised it was just a bit more choppy and a bit more tighter in the country, whereas in town it was a bit more diluted.
Watered down.
Yeah, watered down.
In Mobe they were speaking real patois.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And I also met some family who didn't do patois at all, who were very speaky spokey, and they didn't want to connect with that.
Did they accept you in?
Yeah, both, because yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I got on well. It was gorgeous, man. It was such a, it was a page turner for me. And I have an older brother in Jamaica, so when my dad left Jamaica, he originally came over to England to make a new life and find a place for his son and his
Did you always know you had a brother?
Yeah, I always knew, but I hadn't really had much of a relationship with him. So me and my older brother Michael, who looked very much like my dad, we got on really well. Excuse me. So Michael took me around everywhere, and I found both experiences, really easy. I guess in the country I was questioned more. In Montego Bay I was questioned a little bit more. Why you don't speak the patois, why do you don't do this? But that didn't seem to happen as much in Kingston. Okay. There were a few moments that I had like this internal rage, and I thought, well, why didn't I know about this? Why didn't I having experienced this when I was younger, because I felt more like that than I did English in terms of just social activities, like the way people were walking, and I loved the flow of the language. I loved the movement of the city, both in the country and in town. I loved how people went to go out and dance. I like dancing, and I thought, I don't want to sit in a pub. These are the things I want to do. So it was a little bit of an internal rage. And then also it was a discovery to kind of hear more about my dad's story from his brothers and aunties. So I had 3 uncles over there in Montego Bay. And in Kingston I had like 3 or 4 aunties. And then I found out that my grandfather was quite revered in the music industry there. So wherever I go, they say, "Oh, this is Eric Dean's grandson," and I was treated with such respect because I was my granddad's grandson. So that was like a massive education. Can you imagine going from 0 to 60? Yeah. I went from knowing just knowing a little bit about my culture and heritage, to being bombarded with this, like, all of this established life and way of being that had always been there, but I'd never had access to it.
Your lighter complexion in Kingston, do you think will open more doors for you, you think?
I wouldn't be able to measure, because it was mainly, I was chaperoned by family everywhere.
Okay.
So wherever I went, I noticed I got a lot of attention in the country. Yeah, and I suppose I got good attention. Positive attention. I remember just like girls talking to me, I was thinking, wow, so I knew really attractive women, and yeah, I just hadn't caught up with it. I suppose my sense of self was a little bit undeveloped then, so I didn't quite see it. But then, yeah, my ego kind of jumped in a bit, and I thought, wow, look at all this attention I'm getting. This is crazy.
Wow.
But I didn't feel confident enough to meet it.
Yeah.
It was weird because I'm quite a sensitive guy. I was processing this stuff all the time. So I stayed 3 weeks in Montego Bay, then I stayed 2 weeks in Kingston, and then I stayed my final week back in Montego Bay.
Yeah. 6 weeks for the first time?
Yes. And I remember going back to Montego Bay and feeling a bit more confident about myself.
That is.
I think because I'd kind of filled up on the inside. I didn't feel so much of a fraud about my identity. I'd met aunties who just welcomed me with open arms, and we got along really well, really easily, and uncles who did the same thing, and were really pleased that I'd made the effort to come and see them. And I can remember thinking, why would that be? That's like my duty to come and see you. It's not like none of it's an effort. But they didn't realise that I didn't have all of this information about them. So it was an education on both sides. They didn't understand why my dad wasn't contacting everybody as much as he should have. And then here's his son coming over to find them. And why would this English boy want to come over and find his Jamaican family? But I was trying to explain to him, well, why wouldn't I? So there was a good meeting of minds there. We all realised that we all needed something out of this, and I think I was a good conduit for that. So going back to when I'd left Kingston and went back to Montego Bay, I remember feeling more confident because one of my uncles was really quite, was he frustrated? Might have been frustrated because I didn't speak Jamaican patois. And I'm thinking, but how the backside am I supposed to speak Jamaican patois if I'd not really been exposed to it? But he didn't understand. He might have thought it was more of a choice on my behalf, like a rejection. So I worked through that, and I understood that wherever you think there's another world out there, my family in Jamaica had a different idea of what my dad's life was and who my dad was. And similarly, my dad had a different idea of who my Jamaican family were. So I just started from then. I used to go back quite a few times.
You know, when you came back from Jamaica for the first time, did you feel any different? Like, living back in Manchester now, coming back and mixing now, do you feel like you want to go to your black side now? What did happen?
Yeah, when I came back from Jamaica, man, listen, that was it, man. I didn't want to be English anymore. I didn't want to be anything English, man.
Wow.
Everything was, it just touched my heart in a different way.
Yeah.
So I came back and yeah, I was a bit ridiculous. I was a bit too extreme for a time. Because I was so excited and I was so like, I'd met my family and I could see myself in my family.
Yeah.
I really could. And like I said, I didn't have an unhappy childhood. I had a good childhood. But it was just something in me that was leaning more towards that culture, that identity. It might be something in my head, but I was leaning more towards it. So having experienced it, having been fully accepted and loved and like encouraged, like about, come back when you're coming back. I thought, damn, it filled a big gap. I filled a big gap and a big hole in me. And I knew that also I wanted to make sure that it was going to be a positive part of my culture. It wasn't going to be like a tourist holiday that I was going to just turn up and do once in a while. And it hasn't been. It's always been such a strong part of my cultural identity. Something I'm really, really proud of, but something I also understand. It's not like a token. Excuse me. I'm sure for a time my family got really frustrated.
Yeah.
Because my white family might have viewed it as a rejection of their culture, which it wasn't.
Do you start moving with them a lot? Oh,
Just in a way I would express myself. I would do anything that would lean more towards expressing that Jamaican side of my culture in the way I would walk, the way I would talk, the way I would.
So basically, they said that you change.
Yeah, they said it changed, and I knew I had,
Yeah.
but it's like a pendulum. You swing one way that way, you swing too far that way, and you have to find your equilibrium. But I defy anybody to figure out what I was figuring out with the little bit of information I had. So of course, I was still a child then, 21. I was still figuring that thing out, but I knew I'd found something which I felt truly authentically connected to. And I knew that it wasn't going to be something I would just go and do for a little time and then leave. And ironically, my other brothers, maybe all of them have been to Jamaica once, that's it, and not really connected with it that way. So I know that everybody is different and everyone has a different perspective on those things. So I feel like fully comfortable and fully absorbed in all of my Jamaican culture, and I tend to gravitate towards that, whereas my other brothers don't gravitate towards that.
Have you got kids?
And they got kids.
Have you got kids?
Yes.
How many kids you got?
4 stepkids and 3 grandkids.
4?
4.
Before you go, did your dad go back and forward before you went?
No.
Never been back to Jamaica?
No. He hadn't then.
Yeah.
Yeah, he hadn't then.
Okay.
And when I returned from Jamaica, I was all brown and smiley and happy, and just, I think I just felt fuller on the inside, and some stuff started to make sense. And I started to talk to my dad about his mum, meeting his mum, and his eyes started to water, because I think he realised I'd got the full story then.
Yeah.
And then we'd start to talk at length, and then it was more conversations, and then we all decided to take a trip to see my older brother, who was born in Jamaica but had moved to America.
How many years after you came back?
Probably in about 4 or 5 years.
Okay.
We all decided to go to America, and my sister-in-law planned for my dad's mum to be there. So we
Where in America, you say?
In America, yes.
Where in America?
In Virginia.
So it's like a reunion thing?
Like a reunion, yeah. And we walked through, I didn't tell my dad, but we walked through the door and my dad's mum was there, and that was like a really emotional reunion between the two of them. But what what had happened in the time in between, I'd kept really close relationships and contact with my grandma. So we were really close. So by then, I just felt like I don't remember not knowing her in my head. I'd pushed forward. And all of that, I think all of those connections to my aunties, my uncles, and just feeling a sense of belonging and wanting, like I'd said earlier, my mum's mum wasn't, she was okay, but she wasn't really warm towards us. So having a grandma who really wanted you and was proud of you was like a lovely new experience. And we built a really strong relationship from there. And subsequently, I used to go to Jamaica quite a lot on my own. And then I started to go with my dad. But when I go with my dad, I go on my terms, which is strange. I go to his country on my terms, and I go and stay with my uncles and aunties.
On your terms?
Like I knew how to navigate myself around. So I'd spend a lot of time between Montego Bay and Kingston, and I used to always spend about 4 to 6 weeks there. But I used to like to drive in Jamaica, so I used to love to get to stay in Montego Bay, and in the beginning I used to always stay with family, but then I realised that family wanted to do some of the things I wanted. I didn't want to do any of the tourist things, and I didn't want to be fussed over. And so I found a hotel I like staying at, Toby's Hotel in Montego Bay. And I liked it because a lot of Jamaican business people would stay there. It was quite low key, it wasn't touristy at all. So I started to stay there when I go to Jamaica, and I'd go and see family in between. And I would hire myself a car. And then I would drive myself around, and they were frightened to death of me driving myself around. But I just loved it. And I used to stay at Toby's for a few days, maybe about 4 or 5 days settling. And then I'd get a car and I'd drive over to Kingston. But I used to love the drive, going back and forth. And I used to love driving into Duaney Park. And I know on reflection everybody thought I was crazy and mad, but I just needed to know the country my way. So I needed to drive myself around the country. Yeah, by myself, yeah. I needed to get lost, and whatever happened. I'd travelled before, but whatever happened. So that's what I mean, going on my terms. Yeah. I wasn't waiting for my dad to say, we're going to stay here or we're going to go there. I found a place where I like to stay in Jamaica, and I got to know the staff there. And then I found the places where I like to go and eat, and I used to go and walk down to the main town and sometimes just sit there for the day and do my thing.
What was it like for your dad the first time you went back? What was he?
Yeah, it was like seeing your father as a young boy again. So he went back on his own without me, and then he and I took a trip together, and I'd explained to him that I was staying at this place called Toby's. So he said, but I've got to stay with family. I said, but Pops, maybe you stay with family for a bit, and then I'll stay at Toby's, and then if you want to, you can come and join me. Which was strange, because he went and stayed with his brother, and then in the end he came over and stayed with me at Toby's. Okay. And I said, Pops, you know, it's your trip as well, so you've got to do it the way you like to do it. I'm telling my dad to do this trip this way. So he would stay with his brother and do his family thing, but I'd done all of that family thing too much, so I let them catch up and do their thing. And then he and I would go out walking in the day. And what's great, brother, one of the best experiences, man, when your father takes you on the trips he used to go with his friends before school and after school. So just in Montego Bay, there's just by Toby's, there are some resorts, but there's some open beach, which hasn't been captured obviously by the bigger resorts. Up towards near the airport. So he said when he was a younger boy, they used to walk down this, what they call the low road, and go and mess around and meet some girls, or go and play and do football and stuff. So at night time we used to have something to eat, and we'd walk down there, and he'd talk to me about some of his conversations he used to have with his friends. I'm going with my dad. And then we'd go into the centre of town. And I asked him to take me to all the places he remembered, because I wanted to get a sense of what it was like for him to be a younger man in Jamaica. So we went to, we used to go to this place downtown in the centre of Montego Bay called Big People's Corner. So we just go there and just drink some rum in the day. And a few of his friends who were over from the States, from the United States, would come over and we'd meet for the day. And we'd all stay there and just have a drink.
Wow.
Can you imagine that?
What age group you talking to be a father?
So my dad was like 70, he was 70 then.
Wow.
Yeah, he's 70 then, so they were all still quite vibrant and strong.
Yeah.
And I remember feeling really privileged, thinking, wow, look at this I'm doing with my dad. Yeah. Finding out about how he was as a boy. And I think because of our relationship from when I was 16, I got to know him as a man, not just as my dad. So I think we created quite a strong bond there. And then to listen to his stories about going out dancing and what he would do with his friends, and I knew all about all his shenanigans. It was great. I got to know him as a full human being.
You could see the difference in his body, like more smile, you know.
Listen,
like?
brother, he would just smile bigger, and we used to laugh because we'd say we're so English. I started to think I was more Jamaican than him, because we'd say we're so English because we'd sweat as soon as we come off the plane, and the way we'd walk and the way we talk. But I noticed how English he was by comparison of men of his similar age when he were there. And then in the end, his friends would say, your son understands a patch better than you do, Lloydie.
Wow.
Because I would be in that conversation, just in that space. Because my ears were open, you know, I was very unique. So when we would walk around, I'd watch his Englishness kind of fall, and he would relax and relax. He was quite relaxed anyway, but I just watched that little boy come out of him. And when you're watching your dad, who is then like 70 odd, and he's with all of his friends, and they're laughing from the belly about things they used to do, you think, what a great completion to that cycle. It's amazing completion. And the last time me and my dad went was 2015. Yeah, 2015. He was 75. So we went for his 75th birthday, just me and him. And we stayed at Toby's in Montego Bay and did our thing there, as we did for a few days. And in the time I hadn't been there for about 2-3 years, they'd changed the highways between Montego Bay and Kingston. A lot more Chinese investment. So there was a bus which
Oxford?
Yes, takes you back and forth. So I didn't drive this time. We took the bus because I thought, let's visually see it. And I can remember entering into downtown Kingston, just near Duaney Park, and I was watching my dad's expression as he was almost like reliving the city that he used to know. And there were just those moments where I just capture the boy-like side of him going back to his country. He wasn't my dad, he was like a young man, he was doing his thing. And it was just little moments that I feel so privileged to have shared with him. But I think on reflection, I'm so glad that I discovered Jamaica my own way. And then we shared what we shared together afterwards. Because I didn't feel like a tourist then.
What was your dad like? Did he hug you on those things?
Yeah, he was quite tactile, my dad, yeah. Yeah, he was very tactile. He wasn't a big talker, but he was a tactile. And still till he was like 75, I would kiss my dad when I'd leave him. And when we were younger boys, he used to hug us a lot. So I think I got that from him. My mum's not as tactile, so I'm very tactile with all my brothers, but definitely with my dad. And I suppose, yeah, he just loosened to that kind of bit. And what was interesting, he would tell me so much about his relationship with his dad that I understood that he was really like a little boy who had been a bit lost and a bit abandoned. But he had sex and made kids and then became a dad and didn't really know what that was about. And up until he was like, till he passed, we would spend time together here.
Did that pass?
Yeah, man. And that broke my heart. That was,
Right, let's go back to that.
yeah, man.
You
Yes.
came back,
Mm,
was excited and everything.
yeah.
Was he ill or something like that?
Yeah, he'd been poorly when he was there, and we knew that we needed to have a proper trip together. Oh man, but yeah.
Poorly in what way?
He had COPD, so it's like
Chest?
chest complaints and stuff.
Did he smoke it?
He had smoking cigars when he was younger, but he'd stopped. But I just think overall he just had general like poor health at some point. But our last trip together when he was like 75, it was an amazing time. It was phenomenal. All the family were there, and I really enjoyed it. And then he came. I stayed on in Jamaica, and he went home. And then a few months later, he was poorly, and he and his wife had split up by this point. So I used to I'd go around to his house to see him. And on one particular occasion, I knew he was poorly, so I said I'd come and stay with him for a couple of days. He lived in a place called Wilmslow, which is in Cheshire, which is in the UK. So I went over to see him one day, and I had a key for his house because he was poorly. And I used to call him Papa Bear. So that was my nickname for him, was Papa Bear. So I walked through the door to his house, and the paper was on the floor, and he used to like reading the papers which I didn't like, but he used to read them. And I shouted his name, and there wasn't any reply. And you know, instinctively you know that something's wrong. So then I turned to the right, and I went into what was his dining room, and I knew the place where he sat, and I could see his chair, and then I looked at his chair and it was kind of pushed back, and I looked to the side of the table, and I could see his leg. So then I went in, and you just kind of go into autopilot, I think. So I moved the table, and he was laid down, and he was unconscious. And so I kind of got down near him to see if he was breathing, and I knew he wasn't breathing, but I didn't want to believe he wasn't breathing. So then I started to perform CPR on him, and his body was quite rigid, so rigor mortis had set in, so he'd obviously passed it already. But I'd also phoned the 999 at the time, and so they were talking me through what I was doing. And so I was performing CPR, and then the emergency service came. And it's really interesting because somebody has to tell a child that the parent has gone. Yeah. Because I just couldn't accept it. So they saw me, his arm was basically like that, fixed. And I was doing his CPR, and they said, you know, your dad's gone. And it was, brother, it's like, you know when your world just stops? And it stopped. And I just felt numb. And so I almost in autopilot, I moved aside to let the paramedics do what they were going to do. No, it's horrible, man. It was like, it's a really brutal way to end your relationship. Yeah. Because I went in there to see him.
Can you remember the last time you went there before that day?
Yeah, it was 2 days before.
And he was okay?
Yeah, he was okay. Oh. And we're chatting, I took my younger son down there, and they were chatting, and we're just chatting. I said, right, I'll see you in 2 days, I'll come. But in some ways as well, I'm really glad that I found him. Yeah. Because paramedics had to do their thing, but as a, yeah.
You think you're the closest son to him?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. They would call us Batty and Bench. Oh. Like where you see one, you see the other. So it's quite a few years now. Yeah. And obviously it'll still always be painful because It's hard for a kid to lose a parent that way, especially when you're as close as we were. But I was so grateful for the relationship we had, man, because it's just phenomenal. It was just the best dad I could ever had. And he used to call me Boy Wonder. So when I'd see him, I'd see the smile in his face. Like I see my kids now. We'd smile at each other and he'd see that there was that energy there. It was just to connect. And because we didn't have that relationship in the house, we had to make our relationship. And I think that's what made us so strong. But Papa Bear, man, I'd said, Pops, man, you can't just leave me like this. That shit's harsh. They would call us Batty and Ben. She'd say, where you see one, you see the other.
He was very close to him then.
He was he was definitely my most healthiest relationship in my life. It's powerful.
What about your other brothers?
Yeah, they have relationships with him, but nowhere, not like.
Nothing like yours. Okay.
No, nothing like mine. It's just,
It's so
he was
sad.
just good. But it took some time to get over it. But I just have to look back and think, bloody hell, man. Imagine if I hadn't explored the things I'd explored and done the things we'd done.
You went to study, you say, the college?
Yeah. Well, no, I didn't really do great in secondary school because I was messing about and silly. So I ran around for a few years, and then I went back to finish my secondary school education when I was like 21. And I went and did my GCSEs as they were then, and then you did your A levels into university. Then I did university, and then I went and travelled, and I travelled a lot. I had a really, really good life. I still have a good life, but I decided that I was going to travel as much as I wanted to. So I did. I travelled for many years. I wanted to get my education. And my dad said something really interesting to me one time. The one girl I've only ever loved, I was going to settle down with her and just like start a different life. And my dad said, sex, women and drugs will be here before you came. Were here before you came, and they will be here when you leave. Get your foundations. And I thought about that, and I thought about that long and hard, and I decided that I was going to get an education, and then I decided that I was going to travel. And so I probably took about 10 or 15 years out to do all that shizzle. And then I got to my like mid-30s, and I was just doing too much partying and running around. So it was good.
We're in Manchester?
Yeah, in Manchester, and I used to go to South America, to Brazil a lot. I go back to Caribbean a lot. I've been to lots of other islands in the Caribbean as well. Lots of places in Europe, and I was just very hedonistic. Yeah, I really liked travelling, but I had to do it until I got most of it out of my system.
I'm going to touch your accent now, because I've been to Winnishire, and I know Winnishire people speak, and you speak nothing like Winnishire people.
Yeah, it's funny that, isn't it?
They speak like a broad kind of Manchester
And I don't quite understand where that comes from, because my mum always taught us you land where you fall, so you work back from there. And as I said earlier in the piece, that my mum was a very elegant lady. She was even though she didn't have an education, she was a very bright, emotionally intelligent woman. And so when she would talk, she'd give equal treatment to each syllable. Or say, for example, when a couple of times I'd go out to friends to eat after school, and they would have freezer food, and I just think it was amazing, freezer food, because my mum used to cook all of her food from fresh. And we always had fresh food, fresh flowers and fresh fruit. And the way we spoke, or the way I speak, is very similar to a lot of the people I grew up with. The accent which has been adapted in Wythenshawe is more of a performance. It isn't an accurate reflection of how indigenous, wouldn't show people talk. It's been adapted over time, so people talk like that, and I don't quite get it. And so they think I talk posh, but I don't. I just give treatment to each syllable and talk sensibly.
As you reach your age now, you could say.
What's your question?
What do you see yourself as?
Oh, what do I see myself as?
Yeah.
Oh man,
I'll
yeah.
go right back to your uncle.
Yeah. I'm fully mixed, man.
So you class yourself as a mixed race person?
Yeah, absolutely. Fully, wholly as a mixed race
You
person.
wouldn't say you're black?
No, I wouldn't, no. I say I'm fully mixed, and I'm all of my mother and all of my father, the good and the bad parts. I went through a time when I self-identified as black. And that caused me a problem because it really offended my mother, who was my primary caregiver.
Okay.
And it was almost like I was eradicating her part of me out of my story.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that people don't understand about the mixed conversation is it's deeply personal, it's not political. So your alliances to both parent groups are equally as strong oftentimes. And what happens is people expect you to disown one side of yourself in order to fit in. And that's not a healthy thing to do to any child. But it's what you call from a very mono-heritage perspective. So wherever my mum goes in the world, she'll be seen as a mono-heritage white woman. Wherever my dad goes in the world, he'll be seen as a mono-heritage black man. Wherever I go in the world, I'll be seen as not quite where...
So I'm trying to say, people might call you black.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and they do, but as well, I think for your own mental health, and I say this to my kids, if you get you right, the rest of the world will fall into place. What I was doing when I was younger is waiting for other people to tell me who I was. And you can be in a room of 100 people and everyone's going to have a different perspective on who they think you are. Similarly, when my Jamaican family saw me a certain way, my English family saw me a certain way. So for me, for my own well-being, I had to get me right on the inside, and that meant to be I'm a bit of everything of my mum and dad, but I'm not specifically like either of them. So I have my dad's love of music and his braggadociousness and his charm and his way of being, and I have my mum's stoicism and I have my mum's logic, and for me that's the healthiest way for me to be as a man, to be sound of mind, to know of all of the influences that brought me to this. But within the race discussion, which is interestingly, from a professional point of view, I got into quite a lot, and I used to do a lot of training on this subject. I realised that the conversation has been left externally, so other people own that conversation about your identity, and that's what I got wrong. I should have owned my conversation about my identity. So still people say to me, oh, you should call yourself black, or you should call yourself this, but I know that they haven't been on my journey, so I understand there's a little bit of wisdom I get that they don't understand what that might look like.
All right. Before we finish, to all the mixed race people around the world, what would you say to them about identity? Go on.
I would say the identity thing, it's deeply personal, it's not political, so you have to get you right, and you also, within a mixed parent situation, you make yourself as you go along, so there isn't a ready-made identity for you to step into. And some people will be more like one parent than the other, and you've got to find a way to be authentically all the things which are true to you, and you can't wait for the external world to tell you you are. It doesn't matter what people call you, it's what you choose to answer to. So I know what I choose to answer to, and I know I have lots of responses for anybody who thinks I shouldn't answer to that. But I don't expect people to understand what it looks like from my point of view. Similarly, I don't know what it looks like from how they live their life.
What is some of the names you don't like as a mixed race person?
It's rather than names, it's more intention. It's when people think that they need to tell you what you should call yourself. Okay. So I've had many discussions professionally, academically, where people say, well, you should call yourself black. And people don't understand that the history of that conversation leads back from slavery. and comes back from what you call the one drop rule. So anybody who had one drop of black blood was thereafter considered black. But it was an economic racist policy which was put together to separate the races at the time. So you've got to also know your history on terminology and where this has come from. So people would use half caste when I was younger. And half caste is from the Indian subcontinent, so it means half a class, it doesn't mean colour.
Okay.
Yeah, and things like your breed or your half breed. So most of the terms, a lot of research I did. So I did 7 years research around mixed race identity. And at one point I had the largest data collection on mixed race identity in the UK. And what I discovered was that the majority of terms which we use to describe people from mixed race backgrounds, historically, were often negative in connotation and often related to breeding. So like a mule or a mulatto, everything had a negative connotation of not being a full pedigree. You are half-breed of something. And I think a lot of people from mixed race backgrounds in my study have just revealed like they've internalized some of that stuff about being half of something and not being a full pedigree, if you like. However ridiculous that is, and it is ridiculous when you say it out loud, but because something's not real in reality, it doesn't mean it's not real in its consequence. So on the mixed race thing, it's still an ongoing discussion that people think that they can own over people who are mixed race. So I can see within my English family and in my Jamaican family, they both have different perspectives on the same subject. But actually, I'm the authority on it because I'm the one who's mixed race.
Looking for?
First we look for kids who are playing football so we can give them a vest.
Yeah.
It's not in his plant.
Yeah.
And then the clothes too, we just pass to a community who we think they really need it. Because malom pendo bija muna be ngamera nying ila size ko ajibu.
I run a company called Zen Construction, and I'm using my company to actually build a hotel.
So this hotel is designed to get like more foreigners in, or local people as well?
The hotel is open to all season.
Okay.
And doesn't matter where they come from, but I want to keep it for all season. I don't want to have this concept of tourism only.
Yeah.
There's nothing you can use in English that I don't understand. And there's nothing you can write that I don't understand. Which means my brain capacity is far more capable of what you can handle. Actually, I am working. You're the reason why I'm stuck here.
If we could have those type of good training grounds around the country, by the next World Cup, Gambia might qualify to play the World Cup, because we've just been representing the country in the Africa Cup of Nations, and this with that young talented players, and we have abundance of those talented players if they are given exposure and assistance and a good contacts with them to be exposed to European and other African big clubs.
Yeah.
And
so the football boots, we give you some football boots, but it was used, so you don't mind? People
we don't mind that, because it is very useful here.
Yes.
Because the amount of a football boots is very expensive.